My name is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United States Air Force. And on the day my mother stood in front of 200 wedding guests in Charleston, South Carolina, she raised her champagne flute and cut me down with a smile. "That's my daughter Sarah," she said, pointing across the room at me. "The one who runs away from every fight. She's a coward." The crowd went silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The band stopped mid-note. Someone gave an awkward laugh, thinking it had to be a joke. But it wasn't. She meant it. My mother had chosen her second wedding day in a hall filled with family, church friends, and half the town to deliver her verdict on my life. I stood near the back wall, a paper cup of water in my hand, wearing a plain navy dress. I felt the words hit harder than desert winds I'd stood against in Iraq. In uniform, I've faced commanders who thought women didn't belong in the cockpit, and I've flown missions in skies lit by tracer fire. But nothing cuts deeper than your own mother branding you a coward in front of a room full of people who once knew you as a child. Eyes slid away from me. Cousins stared at their plates. Old neighbors pursed their lips. A few leaned toward each other, whispering as if my humiliation were entertainment. I could hear the faint buzzing of the air conditioner, the shuffle of uncomfortable feet. That silence was heavier than the insult itself, the kind of silence where people decide whether to clap, to laugh, or to simply let it stand. At the head table, my mother leaned into her new husband, a retired contractor in a suit that didn't quite fit. She smiled with satisfaction, as if she'd finally told the truth about me. Then she placed her arm around Ethan, her new stepson, 27 years old, slick hair, sharp tie, a self-satisfied grin. "This," she continued, her voice swelling with pride, "this is the son I always dreamed of. Strong, brave, the one I can count on." Ethan smirked and raised his glass, basking in the applause. I didn't raise mine. I didn't argue. That's never been my way. I just set my cup down on the nearest table and murmured to the bartender, a nervous kid in a bow tie vest, "Water's fine, thanks." My throat was dry, but not from thirst. The band tried to recover, striking up a country tune, but the mood in the room had shifted. You could feel it. People laughed again, but too loud, too forced. My mother twirled stiffly in her gown, her veil bobbing as she danced with Ethan and her new husband. The guests clapped along, grateful for distraction. I slipped outside into the heavy Carolina evening. The parking lot shimmered with leftover heat rising from the blacktop. Cicadas screamed from the trees, a chorus that drowned out the music behind me. I leaned against my gray Chevy, steadying my breath. The smell of honeysuckle mixed with cigarette smoke from two old vets leaning against a pickup near the entrance. They glanced at me, then looked away, not sure what to say. Nobody ever knows what to say when family cuts you in public. I thought about getting in the car and leaving, driving north on I-95, letting the night swallow the whole scene. But instead I stood there, motionless, staring at the garment bag in my trunk. I hadn't planned on wearing it tonight. My blue dress uniform, polished shoes, ribbons, insignia, two silver eagles glinting at the collar. I'd only brought it because habit told me to, after presiding over a promotion ceremony that morning at the base. Now it seemed to hum with its own weight, sitting silently in the dark of the trunk. Inside, I could hear my mother's laughter drifting through the open doors. I could hear her voice bragging about Ethan's service in the reserves, painting him as the family's pride. And I could still hear her words echoing in my head, louder than the cicadas. "She's a coward. I'm a woman who's flown combat missions over hostile territory. I'm a woman who's written letters to parents after their sons didn't come home. I've stood on tarmacs in desert sun, saluting flag-draped coffins until my vision blurred. And yet here in this hall in Charleston, my own mother had stripped away every accomplishment and reduced me to nothing more than the weakness she'd always wanted me to believe." The sting wasn't just the insult. It was the way people's eyes shifted away from me, the way silence agreed with her. That silence was louder than any battlefield I'd ever known. I stayed in that parking lot longer than I should have, letting the cicadas drown out the laughter, the music, and the ache of humiliation. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The cicadas screamed in the Carolina night, but what echoed louder in my head was my mother's voice. Coward. That one word dragged me back through years I thought I'd left behind. I didn't grow up in Charleston's pretty streets with magnolias and polished porches. My childhood unfolded in a creaking duplex on the outskirts, where the wallpaper peeled and the swamp cooler rattled but never cooled. My father left when I was 6. He didn't say goodbye, just packed his pickup one morning and drove off. Mom worked double shifts at a diner on Rivers Avenue, coming home with her apron stained with grease, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to her hair. She was small, wiry, and sharper with words than with hugs. She'd tell me, "Sarah, if you can't fight, you'll never make it. And you're just like your daddy." The way she said daddy wasn't memory, it was accusation. I learned early that her disappointment in him had bled straight into me. I tried to prove her wrong. I joined the track team, pushed myself until my lungs burned, hoping she'd notice. She didn't. When she showed up at school, it was to settle bills or snap at teachers. She never sat in bleachers. She never clapped when I crossed a finish line. Her attention was always on survival, never on pride. So I found other ways to survive. At 12, I picked up a paper route, folding damp newspapers in the dark, pedaling through streets that smelled like wet asphalt. By 14, I was mowing lawns, raking leaves, anything for a few dollars. While other kids saved for Walkmans and bikes, I saved for a bus ticket out. Teachers noticed me, not because I was brilliant, but because I was steady. One Mrs. Keaton wrote on my report card, "Sarah follows through." At the time, I shrugged it off. Later, I'd realize it was the truest compliment anyone had ever given me. By 17, I knew I couldn't stay. The walls of that duplex closed in tighter every year, and Mom's voice grew sharper. One night at dinner, she looked across the table, eyes tired, and said, "You'll never amount to more than I did." She thought it was an insult. I took it as a dare. The summer after graduation, I walked into a recruiter's office on Dorchester Road. The Marine sergeant behind the desk studied me with a mustache twitch and said, "You sure about this, Mitchell? The Corps isn't kind to girls who doubt." "I don't doubt," I said. My voice didn't even shake. That night, Mom cried. Not soft tears, but frustrated ones. She told me, "Don't go proving a point to me, Sarah. The world will chew you up." Maybe she was right, but I needed to try. August came, and I boarded a bus headed for Paris Island with nothing but a pocket Bible, $50 in cash, and a suitcase small enough to slide under my seat. The air smelled like diesel and salt marsh as we crossed into Beaufort. I pressed my forehead against the glass, watching the Carolina landscape blur, promising myself I'd never let anyone decide my worth again. Paris Island hit me like a hammer. Drill instructors screaming until my ears rang. Sand fleas biting until my skin was raw. Push-ups until my arms shook so hard I couldn't button my blouse. I thought of quitting 100 times. But every time my knees buckled, I heard my mother's voice, "Coward." And so I didn't quit. I ran until my lungs clawed at my ribs. I memorized procedures until my mind spun. I learned to clean a rifle blindfolded, to march in step, to obey without flinching. Slowly, something changed. My legs steadied. My voice grew sharper. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I belonged. Graduation day, I stood in formation under the blistering sun, sweat soaking through my uniform, and when the sergeant called our platoon to attention, I lifted my chin higher than I ever had. My mother didn't come. She sent a card instead, unsigned except for 4 words scrawled on the back. "Don't embarrass yourself again." I folded it once, slid it into my Bible, and tucked it into my footlocker. She thought those words would weaken me. Instead, they burned into fuel. Years later, I would fly combat missions, wear a flight suit stained with desert dust, and bury brothers and sisters in arms who never made it home. But every time I faced doubt, every time fear brushed against me, I thought back to that card. Don't embarrass yourself again. Out in the Charleston parking lot, leaning against my Chevy, the cicadas loud in the trees, I realized my mother's insult at her wedding wasn't new. It was just the latest verse in a song I'd been hearing my whole life. The difference now was simple. I had built a life that proved her wrong. The only question was whether I would let her words stand one more time, or finally fight back clean and steady, the way I'd been taught. When I finally walked back into the hall, the air was thicker than the summer night outside. The band had shifted to a softer tune. Guests clustered in circles with plastic cups of wine, their laughter sharp and nervous, like they were trying too hard to erase what they'd just witnessed. But the sting of my mother's words still hung in the air like smoke. She stood near the head table, glowing in her lace gown, her new husband's arm wrapped proudly around her waist. But it wasn't him she wanted to show off. It was Ethan. Everyone, she called, her voice louder than the music. Conversations quieted, eyes turned. She beamed at the young man beside her. This is my son now, Ethan, the one I can finally be proud of. Applause rippled across the room. Ethan, tall and lean in a fitted gray suit, smirked like he'd just been handed a medal. He raised his glass high, his hair perfectly slicked back, the spotlight catching his grin. My mother pressed on, her words sharp enough to cut. He's not like Sarah, he doesn't back down, he knows what it means to fight for family, he's everything I ever wanted in a child. I felt every eye glance toward me, then dart away. Some cousins shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, others nodded, eager to agree. A woman from church whispered too loudly, well, at least she's honest. My fingers curled tight around the flimsy cup in my hand. I wanted to throw it, to shout, to tell the whole room the truth I carried. The truth about Ethan, that his service wasn't the shining record my mother painted. That his file had crossed my desk at the Pentagon with a red flag, falsified training hours, misconduct swept under the rug because of a family friend's phone call. But I said nothing. My mother's voice filled the silence, basking in her own performance. Ethan has already done more with 27 years than Sarah ever has with 40. That's a real soldier. That's courage. The word stabbed deeper than the insult before. Courage. She said it like a weapon, and the crowd laughed, clapped, raised their glasses. Ethan leaned in, whispered something to her, and they both laughed harder. I set my drink down carefully, steady hands hiding the storm inside me. My pulse hammered against my throat, and all I could think of was my mother's favorite line growing up. Sarah runs, Sarah hides. But I hadn't run when the engines of my jet screamed through enemy skies. I hadn't hidden when we landed under fire in Kandahar. I hadn't looked away when flag-draped coffins were carried onto planes, one after another, the silence heavier than any speech. And yet in this small hall with paper tablecloths and Conway Twitty spinning on the speakers, my mother was rewriting my life with a single sentence, and the world around her let it stand. Aunt Linda leaned close, whispering at my shoulder. Honey, don't let her get to you. People talk. I nodded stiffly, forcing a smile, but my chest burned. People talk, yes, they did, but sometimes silence is worse. Silence gives lies power. I slipped away from the crowd and found myself near the buffet line, staring at trays of fried chicken and potato salad gone limp under heat lamps. Ethan strutted up, a plate piled high, swagger in every step. He spotted me, smirked. Oh hey, he said casually, like we were old friends. You're Sarah, right? Mom's first kid. The words tasted like ash. First kid. Not daughter, not colonel, just first, then forgotten. His friend, a broad-shouldered guy with a loud laugh, leaned in. So are you in the service too? Before I could answer, Ethan chuckled. Nah, she does her own thing. He winked at me, a cruel little grin tugging at his lips. Not everybody's cut out for the uniform. I held his gaze steady, though the air felt thick as molasses. Something like that, I said softly. My voice didn't crack, but my insides shook. I walked away, leaving my plate untouched. Back at my table, I stirred another cup of bad coffee, though there was nothing to stir. My mother's laughter rang across the hall, high and sharp. Ethan soaked up every compliment, shaking hands, clapping backs, accepting praise that wasn't earned. The weight of the truth pressed against my chest. I could expose him here and now. I could lay out every detail of his file, every falsified report, every reckless mistake. The room would go silent, and for once my mother would have no words. But then I remembered another voice, not my mother's, my real anchor, my grandmother's, soft and steady from years ago. Sarah, you don't have to fight every fight, but the ones you do pick, fight them clean. Clean, not petty, not ugly, not out of spite, clean. I looked at the garment bag in the trunk, in my mind's eye, the weight of it, the truth it carried. Ethan had lies. My mother had venom, but I had the uniform. And maybe, just maybe, it was time the room saw it. The night outside pressed heavy, warm, and humming with cicadas. I leaned against the trunk of my Chevy, staring at the garment bag that held my entire life stitched in wool and brass. For hours I'd carried myself in silence, swallowing insult after insult. My mother's words still echoed, coward. Ethan's smirk burned in my memory. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over a name I hadn't called in years, Brigadier General Paul Hensley, long retired. But once my commander and the man who taught me that leadership was more about restraint than thunder. When he answered, his voice was raspy but steady. Mitchell, he said, you don't call this late unless something's eating you alive. I told him not every detail, just enough. My mother, the wedding, the insult that stripped decades of service down to a single cruel word, Ethan basking in false praise, my silence. There was a pause. Then he said simply, put on the uniform. Colonel, that's not pride, that's truth. Wear it clean, not loud. Let them see who you are. The line went quiet, cicadas filling the space. I closed my eyes. Clean, the word echoed like scripture. I unzipped the garment bag. The smell of starch and wool rose, familiar as breath. Piece by piece I suited up. Shirt crisp, collar tight. Medals pinned in perfect rows. Silver eagles gleaming on each shoulder, catching the dim light of the parking lot. Polished shoes reflected the glow of the street lamps. Last, I placed the cover on my head, squared my shoulders, and studied the reflection in the car window. What looked back at me wasn't the girl from the duplex on the outskirts of Charleston. It wasn't the daughter branded a coward. It was Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United States Air Force, and she was ready to walk back into the fire, steady, unshaken. I pushed open the doors to the hall. A wave of air conditioning hit me, carrying the smell of barbecue and cheap wine. Music thumped low, couples laughing too loudly on the dance floor. But when I stepped across the threshold, the sound didn't just soften, it died. Heels clicked against the linoleum, each step precise, deliberate. The blue of my uniform glimmered under fluorescent lights, the medals a quiet ledger of decades. Conversations froze, heads turned. A cousin whispered, "Good Lord." Another muttered, that's a full bird, Colonel." The band stopped mid-note. The only sound was the shuffle of chairs as people twisted in their seats to watch. At the head table, my mother's smile faltered, stiffened, then vanished. Ethan's smirk drained from his face, replaced by something I recognized instantly, fear disguised as awe. His wine glass trembled in his hand before slipping, shattering on the floor. And then came the words, sharp and cracking the silence like a rifle shot. "Oh my God," Ethan stammered, voice carrying across the room. She's my Colonel." A wave rolled through the hall, gasps, murmurs. The kind of recognition that couldn't be spun away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I stood tall, let the truth fill the silence, then spoke evenly, clear as glass. "I didn't come here to boast. I didn't come to fight. I came to wish my mother well, but I will not stand silent while my life is reduced to a word that isn't true. I am who I am, and I earned every inch of it." The hall held its breath. My gaze shifted toward Ethan. "You'll handle your service where it belongs, at your unit, not in this hall, not on borrowed pride." His face flushed red. He opened his mouth, but no words came, just a stiff nod. I raised my glass of water, my hand steady. "Here's to making things right when we can." For a moment the silence was endless, and then softly Aunt Linda clapped. Tears streaked her cheeks. One by one others joined, hesitant at first, then stronger, until the hall thundered with applause. Old veterans at the back straightened in their chairs, saluting sharp and proud. A church friend dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Even the bartender in the bow tie vest stood taller, shoulders squared. I didn't look at my mother, not yet. I didn't need to. The truth wasn't for her approval. It was for everyone else who'd been fed a lie. I stood there steady, the applause rising around me, and for the first time all night I felt the weight lift. Not victory, not revenge, just clean. The applause that shook the Legion Hall that night followed me all the way into the parking lot. I remember leaning against my Chevy, the cicadas buzzing like static in the humid air, and feeling a strange kind of release, not triumph, not joy, but the weight of finally standing in the truth. Guests trickled outside after me, one by one, like they needed fresh air after what they'd just witnessed. A Vietnam vet in a faded ball cap approached first. His gait was stiff, his back bent by years of service, but when he raised his hand in salute, it was sharp and steady. "Proud of you, ma'am," he said, voice gravelly. "Wish we had more like you back then." I returned the salute firm. "Thank you for your service." A woman I half recognized from church potlucks pressed my hand between hers, eyes brimming. "Your mama would be so proud, Sarah. I know she would." Before I could answer, she turned back inside, leaving me with the weight of her words. Then came Ethan. He hesitated in the doorway, fidgeting with his cufflinks, the brash swagger gone. His voice was small, almost boyish. I didn't realize. I studied his face, saw not a rival, but a kid, 27, hungry for approval, reckless. Still a Marine, even if lost in the shine of borrowed pride. You don't have to know everything yet, I told him, voice even. But you do have to be honest. Bring the truth, bring your receipts. We'll talk at Quantico, you'll be fine if you face it clean. He swallowed hard, nodded. Yes, ma'am. Then he slipped away into the night, shoulders hunched. My mother never came out, not that night. But later, when I checked my phone in the motel room that smelled faintly of bleach and old smoke, there was a voicemail. Her voice was unsteady, stripped of its sharp edges. Sarah, I went too far. I shouldn't have said it. I don't know how to fix it. Then silence. No goodbye, no apology wrapped in a bow, just that. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to trucks rumble down Route 17. The words weren't enough to erase the wound, but they cracked the wall just enough for air to slip through. Weeks passed. The story of that wedding traveled like wildfire through quiet networks. Marines talk in chow lines, in smoke pits, in the silence of barracks late at night. I never fed the story, never confirmed it. I just showed up to work, same as always. Morning briefings, inspections, paperwork stacked higher than my coffee mug. Consistency. That's what leadership demands. And then months later came the change of command ceremony at the base. The parade deck stretched wide under a crisp blue sky, flags snapping in the breeze. Families filled rows of folding chairs, children squirming in Sunday best, cameras poised. The Marine band played, sharp and precise. I stood at the podium in full uniform, ribbons lined like a ledger of years lived hard. My speech was short, recognition for the outgoing commander, welcome for the incoming. Nothing flowery, just steady truth. When I stepped down to greet families, I saw him. My mother's new husband wasn't there. Neither was Ethan. It was just her, smaller than I remembered, her lace dress traded for a simple blouse and slacks. She stood in the back, hands folded tight, waiting her turn like any other guest. When she finally reached me, she didn't smirk or hide behind sharp words. Her voice trembled but carried far enough for those around us to hear. This is my daughter, Colonel Sarah Mitchell. Not coward, not nothing, my daughter. The words landed heavier than her insult ever had, not because they erased the past, they didn't, but because they were real, simple, public enough. I nodded once, steady, thank you. Then I moved on, shaking the next hand because life doesn't pause for perfect endings. It keeps marching. That evening, driving north on I-95 with the windows rolled down, I felt something close to peace for the first time in years. The hum of the road, the smell of pine drifting through the window, the taste of sweet tea still on my tongue, and I realized something. Blood isn't about who shouts the loudest at a wedding toast. Blood is about who shows up, even late, even clumsy, but honest. And dignity isn't given, it's lived. It's earned in the long nights, the steady work, the quiet truth no one can take from you. If you've carried words meant to reduce you to nothing, don't let them stick. Don't let them define you. Stand in your truth. Stand clean. Because sometimes the crowd needs to see what dignity looks like, so they'll remember it when it's their turn.